Okay, welcome to another episode of NCITE Insights. This is an occasional podcast series we try to do here at the National Counterterrorism Innovation Technology and Education Center based at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. We're a Department of Homeland Security academic center of excellence, and we run counterterrorism research for the government. My name is Erin Grace. I am the host, and with me today is Dr. Tin Nguyen. Welcome, Tin.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. Tin is a senior research associate with NCITE, and he is an expert in securing outdoor events, which is a perfect area of expertise in light of current events. So, Tin, it's been a busy 10 days.
Boy, has it.
But there was a gunman on a roof who shot the former president about 6:11 p.m. A minute later, the gunman was down. It was a 20-year-old from Pennsylvania. Thomas Matthew Crooks was his name. And we don't have much information beyond that. Trump was pierced in the ear. An audience member perished, and there were two others who were injured. It was a terrible event. It showed just a gaping hole in security. And in fact, if we fast forward to today, currently the head of the United States Secret Service is being grilled by Congress about security lapses there. And so in between those 10-day bookends, we, of course, former President Trump is now going to run to be president again. And he had a nominating contest at the Republican National Committee. So he went right from one rally straight into his convention where he was able to give a speech. And over the weekend, President Biden announced he won't run for re-election. And the head of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, basically said, we're going to have a special bipartisan committee to look into security lapses. So, Tin, we have to make sense of this. And we don't have a ton to go on other than, what has already been reported by news outlets about, the lack of security perimeter. So what is your take on all of this?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to take a step back a little bit and just think through how the planning process normally unfolds for events like these. I think right now the Secret Service is obviously under a lot of scrutiny about what happened in that planning process, what sort of resources we're hoping to allocate to this kind of event, and what sort of division of labor they had between them and all of the local law enforcement folks that they were coordinating all of their efforts with. I think it's helpful to think about the issue kind of through a workforce deployment lens of, listen, like these folks don't have a lot of resources to work with, right? Mm-hmm. They're limited in staff. They have a lot of operational constraints. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are stationed, obviously, in Butler, Pennsylvania. And so a lot of the coordination on the front end happens from afar, right? So they're reviewing, all of the different possible plans. They're trying to coordinate with local law enforcement from afar. In a lot of cases, there's a fly-out, so an agent or a few agents, I would imagine, came and flew out just to take a look at the venue space a little bit, just to make sure that they could really figure out where each perimeter should be set. And I think Secret Service, at least to my knowledge, has a lot of control over what those perimeters actually look like and how far they're set out for an event like this one, right? Mm-hmm. And so as they're coordinating with all of these other local law enforcement entities, a big critical question is, well, what did the decision-making process look like to get to the point where there are clear vulnerabilities that are just beyond the scope of the perimeters that they have set for themselves? Mm. And so I think from at least all of the reporting, from what I understand, Secret Service set the perimeters just shy of that building, right, that the gunman was on. And so, you'll hear, or at least from the reporting that has unfolded ever so slowly in the last 10 days or so, there's kind of mixed reporting or mixed perspectives about whose jurisdiction that was. Mm-hmm. And when you're, planning events like these, and there isn't a clear, understanding of who should be doing what and when and where all the time, you run into some issues coordinating a response like that. And I do also want to give a little bit of empathy to the folks that are or that were running security for the event itself too. Obviously there are some planning gaps within the implementation of security there, but there's also a recognition that people might ask, well, why didn't Secret Service shoot the gunman the instant they spotted him on the roof? But they're also trying to be really, really careful about shooting preemptively before a clear threat has been identified. And so they would be liable for things like excessive use of force, right? So they were really, really careful in the way that they enacted their response, at least from the counter-sniper standpoint. And we saw slow timeline unfolding of all of the different folks that were notified. People did identify that there was a suspicious person on the grounds. They reported it to local law enforcement, who then pushed it up to the state, and then they pushed it out to Secret Service to notify them. So they're kind of curious now, at least I would imagine in the investigation, what did those communications look like, and what does the division of labor look like for that kind of moment-to-moment in-event security operations. So all that said, again, they're still working with kind of limited human resources, and the amount of tactical support they're able to provide is always going to be a little bit constrained. So, I think we have to be a little bit sensitive to some of those resourcing issues. And I think that's common with a lot of outdoor events, right? It's much, much harder to bring a bunch of people together and somehow get them on the same page about something.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. I mean, it's easy to armchair quarterback a situation and things that are so obvious afterwards aren't. And in fact, I believe this was the second rally that former President Trump had held in the same exact place. And so it will be interesting to see what an investigation into security lapses might have indicated about complacency, if that even occurred, or I kind of wonder if we've done this already, if there's a sense of okay, we know how this should go. I'm not suggesting that. I just think we have way more to learn about that, and it's very easy from Omaha, Nebraska to point fingers, but I guess it seems like a lot of leaders are in agreement that there was a security lapse that happened, and we're finding out that maybe the Trump campaign had asked for more protection from Secret Service, and maybe we'll find out Secret Service, they said no because they didn't have it. And this gets exactly to a resource constraint you're looking at, aren't you, in your research project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So as part of this research project, what we're trying to understand is how do people navigate some of these resourcing constraints. So we're talking to people who are working event security in a variety of different, operating contexts. So we've got people that are working for large stadiums, to people that are working, your county fair, to people that are working large-scale festivals, that are spanning multiple days. And so there are a variety of challenges that people face in planning. I mean, number one is, obviously the resourcing piece, but what we wanted to understand a little bit was, let's jump into the minds of these event security folks and see how, under some of those constraints, people are able to acquire additional resources to make sure that their security plans are robust. I think some of the most interesting conversations that I've had with folks that are doing this work is that the folks that are really, really proactive about understanding all of the different local players in a given space really, really facilitates that resource acquisition piece. So we've had folks say, listen, we go to the city to talk to folks that are in control of school buses and garbage trucks, and even local private vendors who are running food trucks, so that we can figure out ways to kind of creatively station some of these different physical barriers that we have access to that may otherwise not be available to folks. So some of the relationship building kind of gives access to some of those additional resources. And I think in the context of the event that we were just talking about, I think there's a lot of room to say, hey, look, maybe there are some things that folks could have done to protect the former president by concealing the line of sight in some creative way. And so I think there are lots of different barriers people could have maybe put up. You could have flown a flag that could have blocked high elevation shooters from being able to see the former president as he was speaking, right?
That is
you could
creative,
put some sort of banner up because a lot of the attendees were on the grounds anyway. So, if you were to put something high up to conceal that line of sight, then there's a chance that, that would be protecting him, or at least they couldn't aim as adequately. While all of the folks attending the rally could maybe still see and have the experience that they were hoping to have.
Yeah.
And the last thing that anyone wants, as they're attending events like these, is to have to worry about their own safety, right? Whether it be a concert or, a political rally or, any other event, people want to be engaged.
Yeah, right.
They want to be,
exactly.
Yeah, they want to be invested and they want to be comfortable and they want to have a good time, or at least they want to be informed.
Yeah.
And so usually you rely on security to make sure that all those measures are in place so that people can have that mental space. It's really challenging, but I think, being a little bit proactive about all of the tools at your disposal that you don't necessarily consider as being traditional security tools. It's not like finding extra money for magnetometers or making sure that you have all the appropriate staff in place. Sometimes that's an issue.
Yeah.
But figuring out, what else you can use, whether it be volunteers that are at your disposal or, folks that have access to some of those physical resources you might need. Decoy cop cars are sometimes used just to deter folks.
Right.
So there are a lot of different ways to kind of skin this cat, so to speak. But I think, it's challenging. We do things a certain way for a long time, and it's really easy to kind of take those for granted,
When right after this had happened, the attention or focus turned to Milwaukee. Yeah. So, and I remember the Trump campaign putting out a statement, hey, we're not doing anything different. Yeah. But part of that was an apple and an orange, wasn't it? I mean, the city of Milwaukee was well prepared. This event was going to be indoors. There was a playbook for this. Looking ahead, Tin, especially at political events, what do you think or planners will have to take into consideration now that this has happened? I mean, what do you think will be on the top of their list?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, they're going to be really sensitive to how they set up their perimeters. For all the folks that aren't, well versed in the security space, usually they call them the concentric circles, right? So they have an outer perimeter. Usually that's just around the bounds, just beyond where people are entering into the event. You have the middle perimeter. Usually that's where things like ticketing happen and, all of your entry or ingress, they call it, happens. And then you have your inner perimeter, which is usually where the most important folks that they're trying to protect are. So any sort of dignitaries or talent, political officials, usually they're contained within that inner perimeter, and security is a little bit more robust there. So Secret Service, for example, was in charge mainly of that inner perimeter.
Got it.
Or at least they devoted more resources there. And so as you go further and further out, usually in a lot of different events, you have different folks that are trained to spot folks that are of concern. And so whether it be, the people that are working ticketing, people that are working concessions, those that are letting folks in, usually in those cases, we have people that aren't necessarily law enforcement, but still kind of a part of that security apparatus just to make sure that there are eyes everywhere.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that folks are going to be really sensitive to are, again, some of these key vulnerabilities, like high elevation shooter threats, making sure that you have bomb sniffing dogs that are around. I think right now there's also been some talk among security professionals about the concerns related to, can you detect a 3D printed gun, right? And so there are lots of things that people are trying to consider just to stay a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to folks that are innovating a little bit and trying to breach some of these perimeters and trying to find ways to, make sure that they go undetected by the time they arrive at the event.
And one of the things we know at NCITE with our Threats to Public Officials project is that threats to public officials are on the rise, and there's real legitimate concern that will move from word to action, And so The confounding detail, however, about this case is the shooter does not appear to be some kind of political ideologue, at least not that any evidence has shown. I believe they found him with pictures of Trump and Biden. The Wall Street Journal was calling it, maybe it was, or some investigators they cited were saying maybe it was more the act than the person.
Yeah.
And it might have just been convenient, in which case,
Right.
what a needle in the haystack.
Yeah.
You know? I think about, I don't know if you remember the shooting in the Aurora, Colorado movie theater. So every time for a while I went to a movie, I thought about that.
Yeah.
Or mall shootings, you think about that. Or even with my husband teaching in a high school, I think about high school shooters. But outdoor events, I even with Las Vegas, have always felt kind of safe to me because you're not enclosed.
Yeah.
You know? And so what do you say to people who are going to be going to concerts, political rallies, any of the number of outdoor events that are yet to be had before it gets too cold to have them?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, you know, take a little initiative and be, I mean, obviously try to have a good time. But I think when something feels a little bit off, or you
Yeah.
see something that's a little bit off, usually that's an indicator that maybe you should still report something that
Okay.
you've seen, right?
Okay.
If you just have a knee-jerk reaction to something that, you know, seems unusual,
Okay.
by all means, you know, like make sure you figure out how to report as you're entering into an event. And I do also think that the folks that are running these events need to make all of those different reporting processes really, really clear. Because oftentimes,
Oh,
you
good,
know,
yeah.
you're showing up at, you know, your local baseball stadium, and you know, you're there kind of sitting in your seats, and you see something, and you don't necessarily know exactly who to even call,
Yeah,
or
right.
you know, what website to even jump on when you're trying to report this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So folks were, at least at the rally, able to just yell over at police and say, hey,
Yeah.
look, like we saw something that was a little bit strange. But again, you know, having that in bathrooms or having it on a little marquee, you know, enables people to, at least at just a quick glance, you know, just type something down and submit a report, or, you know,
To
give
be
a
to
little
be on
phone call.
alert at least.
Yeah, like be in charge of your own safety, at least just a little bit.
Yeah. We are this week, Tin, hosting an event. It's on behavioral threat assessment and management. It's going to feature the director of the National Threat Evaluation and Reporting Center,
Yeah.
Melissa Zisler, a board member. Also CJ Wren, who's a detective with the Phoenix PD, and he's kind of an expert in what they call BTAM. Can you tell our listeners what that is in short, and how it could even be applied in any scenario?
Yeah. Yeah, behavioral threat assessment and management, I think in short, it's basically a process for, like a systematic process for identifying, collecting information on, and managing various persons of concern. So again, I mentioned, you know, if you spot something unusual, or you spot someone doing something that's, you know, maybe a little bit suspicious to you, at least at the behavioral level, you know, they're doing something. It's not necessarily about how people look. And, you know, once you identify something and you report some information to, whether it be local law enforcement or to your local school or other community members, I think, you know, the main concern that threat assessors have is that, you know, they're really just trying to support the safety of all of the folks that are potentially involved. And so when we're talking about acts of targeted violence, you know, what people want to do is protect both the victim, but then also devote resources to any potential suspect to make sure that either they're not harming the victim, or to get them psychologically well in a place where they don't feel like they need to conduct some kind of act of displaced aggression or targeted aggression. So I think, you know, people sometimes think about the term threat assessment, and they think of it almost as though it's kind of like a proactive like investigation into a person. Sometimes it's more casual than that, you know, and the goal is really just to make sure that everyone is safe, and whether it be, you know, mental health resources or social services, those are things that we're trying to identify to make sure that, you know, the person of concern is in a place where they feel well enough that, you know, there isn't a need to harm anybody else. So really it is kind of let's figure out, what potential risk of harm this person poses, and then as we're trying to figure out what that level of risk is, we're also trying to figure out what different intervention points may exist, just to make sure that we can support those people as needed, and just so that we can protect, all of the targets, the potential targets as needed. So it's more of a, at least in my opinion, it's more of a caring and well-being type of process, or type of support process than people sometimes give it credit for. I think hopefully, during this webinar coming up this week, CJ and Melissa are able to speak to that a little bit more in depth. It's quite an interesting process that threat assessors go through to manage folks, and I think it's both more proactive, and I think at the community level, it's a much more integrative process than I think people give it credit for. It's not purely a law enforcement investigation. Again, it is really, how do we care for these people, and how do we make sure that these people are well?
Right, and not paint them as suspects right away.
Right.
But just get them the help they need. Thank you for saying that. That program, by the way, is going to be at noon on Thursday, noon Central, I should say. On Thursday, July 25th. You can tune in and watch from our YouTube channel, but we'll just have it streaming right from our website, unomaha.edu/NCITE. There, if you go to the events tab, you can register for this, and we hope to get a big group because it certainly seems relevant. I know that the shooter in the, just to bring it back to why we're even talking about this, Tin, but the shooter in the assassination attempt case would not have popped up on anyone's BTAM, register, not from what we know. And so it can make it maddening to think that this could be anyone at any time. How do we figure it out? But figure it out we must, and care for people we must. And so I'll be grateful to learn more about them. Are there any last words you'd like to say? Anything we didn't cover in 20 minutes time?
I think I think for all of the event security professionals out there, my parting words would be, just try to exercise a little bit of creativity. Who do you know in your community that can support your efforts? It could even be, a local high school that could offer volunteers, and that cues them to think a little bit more about their own safety as well as younger folks attending some of these events. Be partners with folks that are working at your schools. They can offer school buses, just exercise a little bit of imagination when you're putting together some of these security plans. I mean, I think it could go a really, really, really long way, and people sometimes underappreciate the value of making the most of the little you have.
That's great. Well, that's a great spot to end on. Folks, thanks for tuning in and listening to Dr. Tin Nguyen discuss outdoor event security and BTAM. Be sure you join us on Thursday for the webinar. A big thanks to Ben Batterferrano, our student producer, who's behind the scenes. And with that, we'll just sign off.